Well, I'm sure that everyone here has been involved in the recruitment process at some point in their lives, either as the applicant for a job or as the potential employer. Alongside the job description, there is usually a list of essential and then desirable criteria that the applicant might meet in order to be a suitable candidate for the role. An employer would then use those criteria to shortlist the applicants for their interview, and then it would help to guide the interview and recruitment process. The desirable list is the one that is perhaps most manipulated by the recruiting body in order that they may justify appointing certain individuals, especially if they already have a candidate in line for the role. I can remember one occasion at work where the desirable qualities were so bespoke that the only one candidate could possibly meet them, and it practically involved having their DNA. This so-called transparent recruitment process is not always fair, and it does not necessarily give all candidates an equal opportunity to secure the position for which they've applied. Now, today's parable is set in the temple, a place where Jews from every walk of life would gather for prayer. And Jesus directs this story to some in the crowd who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. You were either in or you were out. The characters are socially separate. One, a Pharisee, a devout Jew, known for their strict adherence to the law of Moses, and the other, a tax collector, who worked for the Roman oppressors, who, whilst Jewish, was regarded as a traitor and a societal outcast. Nobody doubts that the Pharisee was a righteous man. He did not steal, he did not commit adultery or cause unrest. He prayed, he fasted, and he gave his tithes to God. He would have been regarded as an upstanding pillar of the community who kept the law of Moses. Evidently, the same could not be said for his counterpart. So what is the purpose of Jesus telling this story? If it was believed that Jews could secure God's favour through keeping the law, then surely the Pharisee is not the man that's in the wrong in this story. Well, there are two main messages at play. The first, and perhaps most obvious, is how we present ourselves before God. In the parable, the Pharisee was quite vocal in sharing his accomplishments and unblemished character. He believed that because he upheld the law, fasted and tithed, that he had earned the right to be justified by God. However, Jesus shows he was a little off the mark. As one scholar put it, his prayer of gratitude might have been spoken to the Lord, but it is really about himself. He locates his righteousness entirely in his own actions and being. And that initial laudable prayer deteriorates into an expression of elitism. The Pharisee leaves the temple exactly the same as he entered it, exemplary in his prayer, fasting and tithing, and regarded as an upright religious leader. The tax collector, however, recognizes his sin, and he cannot even begin to bring himself to look heavenward. In humbling himself before God and acknowledging his need for God's grace in his life, he leaves the temple justified. That is, accounted righteous by God's mercy. The second, and perhaps not as obvious lesson from the parable, is the way that the Pharisee is depicted as judging others. In his prayer, he could have said, God, I thank you that I have not stolen, caused unrest, or cheated on my wife. But instead, he prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even this tax collector. Jesus is highlighting that the Pharisee is standing in judgment of others and using that judgment to elevate his own position and righteousness. If we take a step back from the story, we can see that the parable is actually about God, that God alone can judge the human heart and determines to justify the ungodly. As soon as we choose to judge others in our lives, we step into the shoes of the Pharisee. Any time that we draw a line between who is in or who is out, this parable would suggest that God would be on the other side of the line to where we have placed ourselves. In that moment, we have forgotten the shape of our own salvation and lost sight of who we are called to be in the process. And interestingly, only this morning on social media, I saw an excerpt from somebody's book that somebody'd shared. And it says, I saw something from the author Barbara Brown Taylor, who is a priest and an author, where she said, the only clear line I draw these days is this. When my religion tries to come between me and my neighbour, I will choose my neighbour, because Jesus never commanded me to love my religion. The challenge of the parable is to recognise that righteousness is dependent on God's mercy, a mercy which is extended to all. May we remember that God does not have a list of desirable attributes which we have to achieve before we may be counted worthy of his blessings. And that we need to acknowledge our part in judging others because of how they look, behave, smell, or their habits, or their likes and dislikes. I know I have to regularly have a word with myself as I see somebody and think, oh, and actually, that's not how God sees them. When we stand before God, putting aside our constructed divisions and judgment, vulnerable and aware of our personal need for his mercy and grace, then we too may return home justified. Amen.